beer, it's good for you.
Hello and welcome to the video. In this video we'll be looking at beer aroma along with its source options and the various different ways to test and then manipulate within our beer recipes. So let's get straight into it. Never underestimate the power of aroma when it comes to beer. As humans we have 5 senses: sight, hearing, touch, smell and taste. Many believe that smell is the most powerful of these 5 senses, having direct links into our brain for warning, pleasure and recognition. Naturally, when it comes to beer, the 2 key senses are smell and taste. It is vital to realise that smell is closely linked with taste, due to the fact that our nose is very closely linked with our mouth. When our nose detects an aroma in food or drink that it likes, then already our brain is readying itself to enjoy the taste. You can test this yourself by swirling a beer to unlock its aromatics before tasting it. This will aid you in tasting the various elements that make up the beer too. So please do understand that by ignoring aroma you're also ignoring taste, which when it comes to beer should be a primary motivator to the beer recipe writer. Here is a general beer aroma wheel shown on screen that is useful for identifying and describing the aroma you're experiencing from a given beer. Such descriptors allow for a more detailed analysis of your own beer and can be used to check where the aromas you're experiencing are from, so that you can either harness them further or decide to drop them for the next version of a recipe that you are working on. Naturally, this is good as an overall guide to a finished beer, but if you are starting a new recipe then it is a very good idea to plan your aromas ahead, and this could be done by splitting the aroma down into its various different sources and investigating and testing each. Let's start with the hops. You will find hop aroma wheels like the one shown on screen now that will show you what is possible. These can be purchased in physical form or simply viewed online. There are various different suppliers of hops out there and they are all just as keen to give you useful information about their different varieties, and this certainly includes their aromatics. Doing some homework here before any type of brew will give you a great head start. So let's now look at stage 1 of this homework, which is simply online research where you can learn about our hops characteristics. In our first example here we have Cascade, which is a classic American hop. You will note this aroma and flavour section which mentions unique floral and citrus. But there are more specific clues within the opening description where a grapefruit-like character is mentioned. So you can see that often it's worth reading the whole document rather than just the section information. Another classic hop is Citra, and once again there is plenty to be gained by reading its opening description here, which also mentions grapefruit, lime and tropical characteristics. So if you're looking for a beer that has grapefruit as an aroma, and thus flavour, then these 2 hops might be good pairing choices. However, I would suggest that you check multiple sources for this information. As you can see, this source gives more information about aroma. It just has to be said though that words on a page like these examples we have worked through are all well and good, but we all have different noses and taste palates for that matter, so as such the effects will vary from person to person. Most of us will never detect every aroma shown in these examples, but with some pre-brew testing we can determine what is on offer, and this will assist us greatly. So let's now take a look at how you can test hop aroma for yourself, starting with the most simple method, which is to take a sample of hops in your hands and then simply rub the hops into your palms. This works with both pellets and hop cones. Once you have enough hop matter on your palms, you can then cup your hands and take a good inhale. This will give you an easy indicator of how potent the aroma is, as well as what the primary aromatics actually are. Hop tea is a great way to add in further aroma into a finished beer, but it can also be used for hop analysis. The tests that you can make here can vary depending on what you are looking to test, and can be made in small sample sizes. It is easy to infuse hops at either fermentation or whirlpool addition temperatures. The amounts that you would choose should be at the same rate as your intended recipe, or at least your first assessment. So for example, if you are looking to dry hop of 40 grams of hops in 20 litres of beer, then testing should be at 2 grams per litre. Naturally this example is in metric, but I'm sure imperial users will understand the point. I would suggest that you infuse for the total intended dry hop period. Naturally temperature plays a role here too. You may find that keeping the sample at regular room temperature is ideal due to the fact that you are planning on using yeast that fits this temperature. A test of whirlpool hops is easy to perform, but naturally the infusion period is going to be shorter and the temperature is going to be higher, so this is something that you can test in a pan on your kitchen stove. For a more authentic end result, you can gradually add in other ingredients to your testing, if applicable to your recipe, which can be more hops or other ingredients. Some like to do this in plain water, but I feel that you can move closer to a real world test by adding in an appropriate amount of dried malt extract to your water and boiling it for 15 to 30 minutes first. Naturally, all of these methods will give you the opportunity of testing multiple hops at the same time too. Let's now look at malt. Once again, aroma is a big part of what our brains class as flavour, and just like hops, malt plays a large part in a beer's overall aroma, though naturally this is style dependent. I guess we have all noticed malt aroma while going in, especially with aromatic and roasted malts. Malt aroma can vary wildly in type, from dark chocolate and coffee down to bready and cracker-like aromatics. The strength of the aroma is also going to vary from malt to malt. Maltsters, just like hop suppliers, are also very keen to give you as much information about aroma, as you can see from these two different examples from Weyermann. This can be very useful information when planning a recipe, but how these different aromas will sit in your own beer is somewhat variable. So once again, just use online information as the initial homework. After this, further testing is very useful, so let's look at malt sensory testing. Malt sensory testing is pretty simple stuff when you know how. I will now break this down into steps with accompanying information. I'm going to explain this with metric measurements. If you are an imperial system user, then I suggest you use metric for this because it is much easier to understand and explain. You can easily convert this afterwards to imperial. There are plenty of tools online to assist you with this. Firstly, if you want to test a base malt, then I suggest an amount of grain equivalent to 50 grams. However, if you are looking to test a speciality grain, then use 25 grams of the speciality grain and then add 25 grams of the base malt to make up the 50 grams. If you are testing dark roasted grains, then just 7.5 grams added to 42.5 of base malt will work just great. I have an overview on screen of these numbers that you can screenshot for future reference. Now naturally these numbers relate to sensory testing of effectively just one grain type and how they will sit, but you can also test a mix of grains that represent your entire grain bill. This is not as widely practiced, but some find it super useful, so I will include it here. This test is set up by putting together a miniature version of your grain bill. For example, if your grain bill is at the ratio shown on screen on the left, then you can see on the right the amounts of grain to use in this 50 gram sample. It's pretty simple stuff really. Your next step is to mill your grain, or I should say crush, because this grain needs to be pretty much smashed, so a coffee grinder can work well for this if you do not have a grain mill. If you do own a grain mill that is not quick to adjust, then a coffee grinder is going to be easier anyway, of course. You will then need a fully insulated flask that is at least half a litre in capacity that has a lid. I borrowed this one from my wife, as you can plainly see. You can then add this crushed grain into your flask. You should then heat 400 milliliters of water to 65 degrees Celsius and then add this to your flask. Cap this straight away and then give it a nice shake for 20 to 30 seconds. Then set a 15-minute timer. If you're not from the dark ages, you could do this on your mobile phone. While your timer is ticking away, you need to prepare a small filter setup. Personally, I use a stainless steel funnel with a mini filter that I place a coffee filter on top of. This is set on top of a collection glass at the bottom. Once the timer is up, then give your cup a quick swirl and then remove the lid and pour the entire contents onto your filter. Quite often you'll make a little mess when you do this, but this is what cloths are designed for, and as a brewer you should be no stranger to cleaning anyway. By the end your sample needs to be completely grain free, which may or may not require you to filter more than once. Then cup your hands around the top of the sample to get a good smell of the aromatics. A combination of smelling and tasting the resulting brew is recommended, and while you can preserve this in a fridge in a sealed container, it is best to do your evaluation while this is still as fresh as possible. Let's now move on to the last aroma section for this guide, which covers yeast. Naturally, yeast selection is just as key as anything else in your recipe, and the initial homework here should be around yeast datasheets like the example now shown on screen. Not all yeast companies are giving a great deal of information about their yeast flavours and aromas, but Lallemand are very forthcoming with this information via their technical data sheets, which can be found on their website online. Shown on screen are relevant sections from the Verdant IPA yeast datasheet. On the left is a flavour and aroma graph, which in general is a fair guide to what you can expect from yeast in both departments of flavour and aroma. You will note that with how this graph is presented, that flavour and aroma are clearly linked. On the right I have shown the relevant section in regards to aroma description. Verdant IPA yeast is an ale yeast that is well known as fairly strong in flavour and aroma departments. Its dominant apricot along with tropical notes pair very nicely with the IPA styles and can add in some extra complexity. Despite all that this yeast offers, it is but one way to ferment an IPA style though. Ale yeast in general is going to be much more flavourful and aromatic when compared to lager yeast, but as you can see on screen now, both ale and lager yeast can be rather neutral if you choose to go down this route. The neutral yeast route can allow hop and malt flavour and aroma to shine through, focusing the drinker's attention to these ingredients instead. Naturally, this flexibility is rather style dependent, with some styles having a certain yeast requirement to be in style, like with certain wheat beers as shown on screen now. These wheat beer styles are from two separate countries, and whilst the yeast suitable for these has similarities, there are clear differences. Naturally, there is an abundance of continuously growing yeast choices out there, and once again testing will lead you into better choice selection for your recipes, so let's look at how you might do this now. The fastest method for testing yeast flavour and aroma is to make a small starter using light dried malt extract, and I set it on a heated stir plate. You can then use the resulting yeast in future experiments or full brews, which is very convenient and cost effective. Basic details for doing this are now shown on screen. Bring this to a boil for 15 minutes and then cool before pitching your yeast. Process time should complete within 24 hours, but it may stretch to 36. However, my preferred method for yeast testing is to simply brew a small batch of beer and test this way, because quite simply the results will be much more accurate and useful to what I'm looking to achieve. I have a dedicated small batch setup which is ideal for very small brews. All of my recipes are developed using this small batch method, and sometimes I will temporarily use a neutral yeast so that I can focus on the malt and hop flavours and aromas first. Once these are where I want them to be, then my suspected yeast of choice will then be added into the recipe, or perhaps I will brew a larger batch and then split it between several fermenters so that I can test more than one type of yeast. Sometimes the yeast that tastes the best out of all of these with a given recipe can be a nice surprise. I have a video guide that details my small batch setup, which as you can see from its title is very budget friendly. Testing recipes like this is fast and fun and allows much smaller batches compared to regular homebrew setups. Check out this video for more details. I do hope that you found this video useful, informative and interesting. If so, why not consider liking and subscribing? For further support you can join the channel's Facebook group, and if you would like to support the channel then check out the channel's merchandise store, as all profits go back into the channel. Until next time, happy brewing!